Okay, great. Thank you very much for coming. I have no idea if anybody knows why you're here or what you're going to be talking about, but the presentation is called Gardening is Murder, and I'm going to talk about a whole bunch of things. But first thing I do is I really need to start with a word of caution. I've given this presentation in a number of places, and a couple of weeks ago I was up on the North Shore, up in Marblehead, and there was a wonderful crowd, but there was a lady who was sitting right where Eve Potts, who is my neighbor, is sitting. I was afraid nobody was going to come, so I brought my neighbors. And at the beginning of the presentation, everybody heard, oh, this is supposed to be very humorous. And so she had a sort of a smile on her face. But as the presentation went on, the look on her face got more and more sort of dubious. And then finally, by the end of the evening, it was one of sheer horror. And when the lights came back up, I went over to her and said, I don't know what I did. Please tell me, how did I offend you? And what she said was, my husband retired 5 years ago, and he helps me in the garden. And he doesn't really talk when he's out there. And my fear is that he's thinking the things that you're saying. So with that as prologue, then what I want to do then is I'd like to give you a word of, I guess, relief in all of this. And that is that what I'm going to be saying this evening bears no relationship to what your spouse or helper is thinking out there in the garden. Chances are what he's really thinking about is Red Sox opening day. And so with that said, and with your minds at ease, I spent 35 years out in the corporate world. But I guess was a very wonderful career. I enjoyed it. But throughout that time, 8 years ago, I had the opportunity to walk away from it. And I did not hesitate for even a second, because all my life I had always wanted to be a writer. And being a writer has turned out to be a wonderful thing. I now have 8 books to my credit. But when you first sit down to write, you have to know what it is you're going to be writing about. And what you need is a muse. And so I have the world's greatest muse because I am married to a gardener. And because Betty is here, I'm not allowed to say all the things I would love to say about her, except she is an uber gardener. In fact, many of you may have come to hear her here at the garden twice. And we have a very large garden. We live in Medfield. We have 2 acres, and it is chock-a-block with plants. It's a beautiful garden. It's been profiled in the Wall Street Journal. It was part of the Garden Conservancy Open Days program. So it's a really great garden. And within this garden, I have a role. My role is to dig holes and to move rocks. And Betty is the person who plans the garden and deals with it and such. But we have traveled the world looking at gardens, learning about gardens. And the funny thing is that, I mean, we travel, and there's no better place to go than to England. England is sort of the epitome of garden heaven. But while she's going there and she's looking at the newest cultivars and talking with people and learning all about this, what I'm doing is, because of my business career, I'm looking at the garden hierarchy. And so at the apex of a garden, there is the head gardener. This gentleman happens to be at Hidcote Manor out in the Cotswolds. And he is Eton by way of Oxford or the other way around. He speaks in these dulcet baritone tones, and you will buy anything he has to sell because he is so darn charming. But while he carries around this staff, he doesn't actually do any of the work. He gives the orders, and the person to whom he gives the orders to are the undergardeners. These are the people out there on the estate who are actually digging the holes and moving the rocks. But what I found as I'm studying these gardens is typically there's one person among them. That one person is the one person whom the head gardener will talk to, will listen to. For example, he will go to Old Ned. His name is always something like Old Ned. And so, Old Ned, we're thinking about grubbing out the hedgerows in the south 40 hectares. What do you think of that? And Old Ned will stroke his beard. He invariably has a beard. And he will say, well, sir, that's an interesting idea, but if you may remember back in '73 during the great storms, when our neighbors' estates were washed out into the neighboring county, ours stood firm because of those hedgerows. And so the hedgerows stay. I said, who is that guy? Because I would love to be listened to in my own garden. So I ask around, and I finally find out who he is. And this person is called the Principal Undergardener. I said, incredible. Now I know. And so I thought this was such a great idea that I went off, got some jackets and shirts and coats and hats and everything else made for myself. And so I became the Principal Undergardener. Now, my job has not changed one iota. It's still to dig holes and move rocks, but along the way, what's happened over the years is that I've learned a lot of things about gardeners and gardening. And I've also gotten some pretty good ideas about books. What I first like to do is to share you some of the gardening wisdom I picked up along the way. And let me start, if I may, with what I call the rule of three. Now, the rule of three can be boiled down very simply as this. The introduction of any new plant into a garden requires the digging of a minimum of 3 holes. Now, everything I'm going to tell you this evening, I guarantee is absolutely true. Everything has happened to me personally. I am not making any of this up. This is our garden. It's a beautiful garden. It's a wonderful garden. It's got all the everything you'd ever want into it. It is full. It is completely chock-a-block full of plants. There is no place left to plant anything in there. But that does not stop my wife from going out and buying stuff. So here's what the rule of three looks like. Betty goes out and she buys a new plant. In this case, Itea virginica Little Henry. Does anybody in the room know Itea? Itea, if you are a gardener, Itea is a plant you want in your garden. The gold standard is called Henry Garnet. And Itea Henry Garnet is a wonderful, it's a native shrub. It has this beautiful spring bloom on it. It looks glorious in the garden all season long. In the autumn, its leaves turn yellow and gold and red. But then, about the beginning of November, this marvelous thing happens. The leaves turn a coppery color, and except for a winter like the one we were just going through, they will stay on the plant all season long and drop off now as it begins to put out its new leaves. So this is wonderful. So Betty goes out and she buys a dwarf cultivar of this called Itea Little Henry. So what we do is we go looking for a place to plant it, and because this wants a lot of sunlight and it doesn't require special watering, we know this is going to be perfect out in what we call our shrub bed out at the very front of the property. So Betty walks the shrub bed looking for a place to put it because, as you can see, the shrub bed is full. And what she's looking for the weak link. And she finally finds it. What she finds is there's a baptisia that's been growing out there, and this baptisia is not happy because this baptisia either wants more water than it's been getting because we don't water this garden, or else it wants to have some shade, and it's getting neither one, and so we decide out it goes. So we dig a hole, out goes the baptisia, in goes Itea virginica Little Henry. Now, in any other garden, perhaps that would be the end of it. The baptisia would go to the great compost deep in the sky, and that's the last you'd ever hear of it. But not in our garden. In our garden, she now goes looking for another weak link, and she finds it very quickly. We have a stand of hypericum sitting right out at the curb. This hypericum has been there. It's sort of a failed experiment because it's supposed to be a shrub and instead it's more like a ground cover. But this is the happiest hypericum you have ever seen because this hypericum is getting all the water that it needs. Now, you may have heard me just say a moment ago, we do not water this bed. We have a secret weapon. Living next door to us, we have one of my neighbors on this side, not the one I'm talking about, but on the other side, we have a set of neighbors who, because fairly close to Medfield, and you may know people there, I'm just going to call them the McStupids. The McStupids have lived in this house for 8 years. They have a lawn sprinkler system, which they run 10 months out of the year, and they have never once aimed it. So they not only water a large part of the street, they also water a part of our garden. And so this hypericum has been soaking up the water, doing wonderful things, very happy, but it doesn't belong there. You got to be standing right over the top of it to see it. So we dig another hole, out goes the hypericum, in goes the baptisia, which has been happy as a clam ever since. And so, once again, hypericum, is it going to go out to the compost heap? No. We have a transplant bed. Specially designed and built raised bed along the side of our garage, and everything is going in there, and I was getting a high sob. I don't know what it's for. Anyway, so the transplant bed is going to now house this, is now going to be housing this, the hypericum until next May when it goes to the Medfield Garden Club plant sale. So This is, again, now you understand the rule of three. It has a corollary, which I call the rule of the rock. The rule of the rock is, well, you understand, we live in New England. If you put a shovel in the ground, you're going to hit a rock. But what the rule of the rock says is that the more certain you are that you want the plant there, the larger the rock is. And if the plant can only go there, the rock grows exponentially. That is the rule of the rock, and as proof of it, this rock wall at the back of our property did not exist, at the front of our property, did not exist when we moved into this house 14 years ago. It is now 120 feet long. And it has been built entirely from the rocks that we dug in terms of planting this stuff that we put into our property. Everybody with me so far? Let's move on to the cascade effect. The cascade effect can be expressed very simply. There's no such thing as just planting something. All right, I'm going to explain why. This is an evil place. Everybody has their favorite nurseries. Ours is Western Nurseries out in Hopkinton. And it has a hold on Betty which is kind of spooky. I mean, it got so bad about 9 or 10 years ago, and we were at the peak of our garden building, that I went to Wayne Metzett, who owns Western Nurseries, and I said, Wayne, let's cut out the middleman. I'm just going to have my paycheck direct deposited with you. And you just agreed to give us back enough money to buy groceries every week. Well, we didn't quite come to that, but we have a lot of plants from Western Nurseries in our garden. And Betty goes one day and she buys Pinus strobus pygmaea. I can only pronounce that once properly per day, so I'm just going to call it a pygmy pine. Pygmy pine is a wonderful plant. It was a new introduction at the time she bought it. It's a little plant. This is a little tiny plant. It grows very slowly, but it's great for garden structure. And this is going to be the centerpiece for what we call our inner sidewalk bed. The inner sidewalk bed sits right up next to the house. It's about a 200 square foot garden, and it must have 300 or 400 plants in it. But it's wonderful. So I go out and I get my bucket of compost. I get a shovel, and I get my wheelbarrow that I've got pygmy pine in it. I go out and get ready to plant it. When Betty says, "Wait, see that solidagio? This is the first week of June. It started insinuating itself in the bed. It's self-seeding. It's going to take over if we don't do something about it. Let's get rid of the solidagio." So we spend a few minutes plucking out all of the solidagio so that all works out to be fine. So finally, I'm ready to go to plant. I'm just ready to put the shovel in the ground. She says, "Wait, the peonies. Do you still get the peonies? They've just finished blooming." And at this point, she's saying, "No, we can't have that because they look ugly. So we have to trim all the peonies back down below the level of the leaves so that they all look nice and bushy. Everything's fine. Ready to plant yet? Of course we're not. No, we have allium in this garden, and allium looks beautiful. It's in bloom, but just as great is that even when it dries out, it's got this wonderful, beautiful allium umbral. Sort of turns brown, and it's marvelous, and it looks terrific in the garden unless it's been knocked over by wind and rain. And so we've got allium that has been knocked over by wind and rain, so we have to get rid of the broken allium umbrals. Great, now we can go ahead and plant. Except that the bearded iris have also just finished passing, and they're just sitting at this gray glump on the top of them. So we have to trim off all the bearded iris right on back down to the ground, get rid of those. Great, we're ready to go ahead and plant. Of course we're not, because the columbine had finished blooming, and now it's turning, the seed heads are up there and they're starting to dry out, and once those seed heads dry out and the seed heads start scattering, you're going to have columbine up to your waist in your garden. I see some people nodding in the audience, yes. So we have to go ahead and remove the seed heads from the columbine, and of course as soon as we see that, we know that the salvia has finished blooming, and you want to keep it blooming all the way through the season. You want to go ahead and trim it back down to the next growth node, get that off, and it'll just bloom and bloom again. Everything will be wonderful. Then, of course, the rule of three comes into place, because there's a geranium sitting right as where we want to go ahead and put the pygmy pine. And of course, next to the geranium, there's a Stokes aster, which is going to be encroaching into that area. So we have to get rid of that. So when we've done all those things, then we're able to put in, this is the pygmy pine. Okay. And in order to put, see, there's the geranium, there's the Stokes aster, there's all the other stuff in the garden that we had to take care of. So in order to put in that one plant, all we had to do was that. 3 hours to put in one plant. All right, internet gardening advice. How many of you go to the internet whenever you need to find out things about gardening? Good showing of hands. Okay, be very, very wary when you do. Let me tell you why. Because the law of internet gardening is that the exotic bad advice is much more prevalent on the internet. Google doesn't know the difference between good advice and bad advice. It only knows what's popular. And because that bad advice sounds so great, it's up there at the top of the rankings. Let me give you a for instance. Now, does anybody remember last June? Last June, it would not stop raining. Logan Airport got 14 3/4 inches, and out here, we got 17 inches of rain in June. It rained every day. You could not walk around for all the rain. It was horrible. And because June was a banner month for rain, July was a banner month for slugs. Oh, I hear those, ugh. No, Arions distinctus. Let me give you some fascinating slug facts. First, slugs are hermaphrodites. Slugs do not go to singles bars. Any two slugs can bump into one another and play rock, scissors, paper for the right to lay a couple hundred eggs in your garden plants. Second, slug eggs will persist in your soil for years. If you had them last year, you're going to have them next year, so you want to take out, say, some of the mulch and the soil from out into the plants, get them back to where they're supposed to be, because otherwise you're going to have slugs again. Third, slug eggs look just like osmocote. You don't believe me? Here's slug eggs and here's osmocote. The reason I know this, got a good friend who lives down in Bridgewater. Her name is Mary Arnberg, and she is the hosta queen of the universe. Mary had put down osmocote back in April, and so she's walking out in her garden at the end of June saying, wow, this osmocote is lasting a very long time. I must be doing something right. 2 weeks later, the osmocote hatched. And finally, slugs are cannibals. When a slug runs out of your plants to eat, it will simply look left and right at the slugs around it and will say, lunch, appetizers. All right, with that in mind, let me go ahead and tell you what we did. We had slugs in our garden. They were little tiny things, but we knew they were going to get huge. So what we did was we went to the big box store like everybody does, and we say, okay, give me something to kill slugs. So I reach up to the top shelf because it's got the big giant thing that says kill slugs, pull it down, I'm ready to go off and pay for it, and Betty says, wait. In addition to everything else, Betty is also a chemist. She turns the box over and looks at the back of it and says, metaldehydes and methiocarbs. That's what they're using to kill slugs. That is also going to kill anything that comes into your garden that gets it on its paws. And our neighbors' cats and dogs walk through our garden all the time. And they're going to get this and they're going to lick them and they're going to get sick too. So she goes over and she's throttling the store manager. And I'm saying, but what about the slugs? So we go home and we go on the internet. And I type in how to kill slugs on plants. And I get 5,070,000 results. And it only took a quarter of a second. That is a real search page, okay? So, start right at the very top, and the first thing we find is slugs will not go over lava rock. Now this happens to be true because it's got these little sharp, spikes on it and such. It tears out their little underbellies, and you hear them in the night screaming in agony because their life force is oozing out of them. Now, how many people can tell me how many active volcanoes are there in Massachusetts? I didn't think there were any, no. So this is really good advice in Hawaii. But I priced it out. I said, okay, if this stuff works, let's go ahead and make it work. What will it cost to do our garden with lava rock? It would be roughly equal to the gross national product of Costa Rica. We are not going to do this. So we go on down to number 2 in the thing, which says dryer lint will repel slugs. Dryer lint, yes. So there's actually I understand the scientific basis. Slugs move along a sort of oozy thing, and dryer lint is nothing but fluff. So what happens when the slug comes into contact with it? The fluff sticks to its underside, slows it down until pretty soon it can't move. But as the website that promotes this will tell you, what you really need to do is you need to turbocharge it. You need to add 4 ounces of vinegar to your final rinse. That puts acetic acid into the fluff. And now it's not only going to slow them down, it's going to make them really nasty because the acid's going to be eating away at their tender insides. This, I don't know about you, I don't want my clothes smelling like a garden salad. Plus, we're going to have to do an awful lot of wash in order to do 2 acres worth of lawn, so let's let's go ahead and skip that one. So go on to the next one down the list. It says quackgrass. The people out there believe quackgrass is the perfect thing to kill slugs. Again, a scientific basis. There is a neurotoxin inside the quackgrass, and what it does is it gets inside the slug and it drives them crazy. Isn't that a wonderful thing? Your slug is being driven crazy. In fact, this is such a prevalent piece of advice on the internet. I even found this, which is a recipe for quackgrass cake. Corn bran, powdered milk, cornstarch, beer, gotta have beer. Dried quackgrass, put it through a meat grinder into pellet form, spread it out among your plants. The slugs come in, they eat these little pellets, and you hear them going crazy in the night. We were corporate gypsies for a number of years. We've lived all around the country, and we live down in Virginia. Betty looks at this recipe, and she looks at the 4 cases of beer that I have stacked up because I'm ready to go out and start doing this. And she says, Neal, do you remember when you lived in Virginia? Yeah, I remember Virginia. It was hot and humid. So, do you remember, what was that stuff we couldn't get out of our garden? Quackgrass. Yeah, that's what the stuff was. You do not want to do this. Quackgrass, once it gets in your garden, you never get it out unless you're willing to use napalm or a low-yield thermonuclear device. This stuff is horrible, but it's still out there on the internet. But no worry, because one more item down is Rhode Island Reds. Yes, for Rhode Island Reds, the slugs in your garden is Sunday brunch at your favorite restaurant. It's absolutely wonderful, but what it doesn't make clear is, do I want to pick the slugs off one at a time and take them to my Rhode Island Red, or do I want to have a flock of these and let them run rampant through the garden? Now, maybe Milford is much more enlightened in this, but where I live in Medfield, the town selectmen take a really dim view of flocks of chickens running through your garden. So, no, we're not going to be doing that. But as it turns out, there are websites that say things of blackbirds, jays, gulls, seagulls. They're all wonderful out there, and they all want slugs. And it's all absolutely true. Well, we attract all of these birds to our garden, except for the seagulls, and we still had the slug problem. So pretty clearly, something was going on here that this wasn't enough. So we finally say, okay, better living through chemistry. Let's go back on the internet. Let's see what else is out there. And we do. We've learned our lesson. And the first thing you find is isopropyl alcohol. Now, if you have houseplants, you know the drill. You find scale on a houseplant, you get out your bottle of isopropyl alcohol, you get a Q-tip, dip A into B, rub it over the affected area, isolate the plant for a week or 2, wait until the scale is gone, bring it back into the general population. It works just fine. So yeah, that's good for houseplants. In quantities sufficient to kill slugs, you're going to have to use an awful lot of alcohol, and it's going to inhibit the plant's ability to absorb water. Pretty soon, it's going to kill the plant. So this is not sound advice. But fortunately, very close to that, there is wormwood tea. If you grow Artemisia, you can make wormwood tea. You're saying, wormwood tea, I've heard that before. Oh yeah, that's the stuff that goes into absinthe. That's the thing that killed off Toulouse-Lautrec. Anybody remember that? Okay. So great, it's readily available. You got a common garden plant, you boil it up into a tea, everything's wonderful, except for the fact that this is a really serious narcotic. And those same little cats and dogs who are going to get into the metaldehydes and methylcarbs are going to lick their paws after you put this wormwood tea on your plants, and it's going to start making them sick too. Do not want to do this. Ammonia? Yeah, ammonia will kill slugs in a big hurry. It'll kill your houseplant in almost as big a hurry. Where does this advice come from? But finally, we get to quassia. And finally, we've got something that says, finally, this makes sense. Quassia comes, it's a native of Ecuador, and there are quassia trees on every street corner in Quito. It's a wonderful thing. This stuff is so effective that in the Spanish dialect that is spoken in Ecuador, there is no word for slug. That's how effective it is. So I say, this is it. This is what we finally need to do. So what you do is you want to go out and get yourself some quassia extract, mix it up, spray it on everything. So I go looking for quassia extract. It's $400 an ounce. We're getting desperate at this point. Go down about page 5 of the Google results. We find from the Iowa Master Gardeners, we find, hey, use iron phosphate. You just go ahead, it also comes in pellet form. You put it on your plants, and the slugs eat it, and they lose their will to live. Wonderful. A slug ingests this, and pretty soon, they're watching bad cable TV movies. They're reading Sartre and French poetry, and they're curling up in a corner and dying. And then that other thing about slugs being cannibals. Slug number 1 looks at slug number 2 over here and says, hey, 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 walks over, ingests it, it gets the iron phosphate in it, it too begins thinking about remembrance of things past and such. Wow, okay, gotta have a downside, right? What's it break down into? Well, it breaks down to iron, that's good for your leaves, phosphorus, that's good for your roots. What's the hitch? There is no hitch. This is a great solution. This is the ideal solution, but it's boring. Look, where is the picture of the exploding slug? Show me the picture. It's got a graph on the back. Come on, I can't do any of this. So there's the problem with the internet. The problem with the internet is that the exciting stuff is way up there, the good advice is way down there, and you can't tell the difference between them. Let me move on to the problem with wildlife. And the problem with wildlife is simply this. They've never seen the Walt Disney films that you and I have seen. They don't know how it is they're supposed to behave. Let me give you a for instance. We are composters. Does anybody else in this room do compost? Oh, thank you. We've got a big 5-bin system across the back of our property, and the big 5-bin system takes care of all of our lawn debris, and so it breaks down into compost in a period of like 2 or 3 years. But next to our garage, we have a thing called the Earth Machine. The Earth Machine is a marvelous tool. It's this big 55-gallon sort of plastic drum. You put your kitchen scraps in the top of it, except for anything that's meat, dairy, or eggs, or no, meat or dairy, and bones. And then you just keep putting it in. Then you put in things like leaves or strips of newspaper. When it gets to be at a third full, you add a shovelful of dirt. You keep adding stuff into it. And then starting about 3 months later, you open up the bottom of it, and there is this rich black gold coming out of it. Composters are wonderful. I am the poster child for the use of composters. This is the compost that comes out of our composter. It's marvelous. It's what we use in our garden. It is absolutely terrific. We are so believing that the composters are great things that we got the Medfield Garden Club involved in selling them, and we have placed more than 700 composters in a town of 10,000, selling them out of our driveway. We have single-handedly turned Medfield into the Saudi Arabia of compost. And in order to make certain that they really get involved with everyone, what we did was we gave them to the local school. The second graders go out in the spring and they plant a garden. And they throw all the stuff from the garden into the Earth Machine. They come back as third graders in the fall and they harvest the garden. And then they open up and they see all the stuff, the compost that's coming out of it. And they go home and they tell Mommy and Daddy all about it. And they keep telling Mommy and Daddy all about it until they have one too. So this is terrific, absolutely wonderful. Things are going along swimmingly well. Last year, just before Thanksgiving, I go out one morning in order to go ahead and put our eggshells and grapefruit rinds into our composter, and I find this. A squirrel has gnawed a hole right through 1/4-inch plastic and gotten into the composter. There is a trail of debris coming out of the composter leading into the woods, where in the distance I can hear a squirrel belching. Now, I spent 35 years in the corporate world. I'm not going to be defeated by any squirrel. I just go rummaging around in my garage and say, what have I got in here? And what I find is, yep, got a metal pot, got a brick, put the metal pot right over the hole, put the brick right behind it in order to hold the metal pot in place. What I know is going to happen is the squirrel's going to come crawling up into the compost, going to find itself in this little metal cage. It's going to bang its little paws against the walls of it, and then nobody's going to come help it, so it's going to slink back outside, down the composter, into the woods, and go eat acorns like they're supposed to. Perfect. Great. The next night, there it is. Twin holes either side, now 3 times the original size. An entire army of squirrels are getting into the composter. Twin trails of debris going out. The group over here are belching. The ones over here are laughing. Maybe I shouldn't have been saying life is like a Walt Disney film, because I'm thinking Looney Tunes. And what I'm thinking is, I'm thinking Daffy Duck, where it sits there and he says, of course this means war. I go to Will's Hardware in Medfield, my local store, and I say, fix me up with something. I get fixed up with something, all right. I get 10 feet of hardware cloth, 1/4-inch steel mesh. That's on the inside of it, around the side. Outside of it, I've got wire that I made barbs on, sitting all that, so that whenever the squirrels try to come up it, they're going to get their little paws are going to get stuck, little stigmata in here. It's going to be absolutely horrible, and I'm going to hear them crying in the night, and everything is going to be absolutely wonderful. The very next night, here it is. This is what they've done. This is a gash that is over 18 inches long. They've eaten this composter. I mean, this is what they're doing, and now the debris is just all over everything out there. I mean, there's nothing you can do about it. And in the woods, there's a whole chorus going, yeah, 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 yeah. It's like, ah. Well, this is what our composter looks like now. We have achieved entente cordiale. I can get stuff into the composter by reaching over the wire and taking off the lid and putting the stuff in. Getting stuff out of the composter is a bit of a bear, but we take it apart and do whatever it is we have to do. But that's what it takes. That's the problem with wildlife. If I may, let me turn to the economics of gardening. And what I'd like you to remember in this, repeat this mantra to yourself: you're in it for the fun. A couple of years ago, I decided I was going to grow potatoes. We have a beautiful we have a community vegetable garden. We have a 900-foot plot in it, and I said I'm going to grow potatoes, so I dig twin 5-foot trenches. You know how to grow potatoes. You dig a trench, you sift the soil, get rid of any rocks. I bought a pound of prime russet seed potatoes, quartered them, dusted them with a special dust. You put them in the bottom of the hole, you put a little layer of dirt over the top of them, you water them, you wait, and about 10, 12 days later, they sprout. So you put a little more dirt over the top of them, water them some more, they sprout some more, until pretty soon you're getting toward the top of the hole, and you've got this wonderful thing of greens. Then you're above the ground, you've got greens all over the place. Everything is absolutely wonderful. And then in the middle of July, along came the Colorado potato beetles. Where did they come from? Colorado potato beetles. You know, what I figure is, this is United Airlines. They're flying Denver to Boston. They've got these breed and feed excursion fairs where they fly over the top of my house and they just drop the larva right out of the plane, land on our garden, so they're all happy and everything. This is all I can come up with. But what I know is that for 2 solid months, from the middle of July until the middle of September, I was out there every single day smooshing Colorado potato beetles. I got the larvae until my fingers were completely yellow. I get the nymphs, and then I get the adults who are always copulating. I mean, but finally, in the middle of September, I harvested my crop, and I got 20 pounds of the most beautiful potatoes you have ever seen. These are wonderful, and I get them all dug out. I clean them off, and I have a little tote bag that I carry, and I go ahead and I carry it into the kitchen where Betty is in there, and she's making out the grocery list, and she has the Stop and Shop flyer in front of her. Now, the right reaction to this is, ha, they taste better. Sure, right. Not me, no. 35 years in the business world, I did a spreadsheet. 20 minutes per day on potato beetle duty. For 60 days, that's 1,200 man-minutes, that's 20 man-hours for $3.98. So what did that work out to in cents per hour? It worked out to, no, I forgot, the cost of the seed potatoes. It isn't what I did for $3.98. It's what I did for $2.73, and that works out to 13.6 cents per hour. I have not grown potatoes since. There are lots of things you can grow. Grow corn. Corn is wonderful. Corn, you'll get your money back 20-fold. Marvelous, great things. Do not grow potatoes. But sometimes you don't think about the dollars involved in it or the dollars of your labor because, well, for example, I've removed a stump or two in my time. We moved into our house in 1998, and it had this river birch out in front of it. And the river birch, the worrisome part is that this photo was taken in 2001, is that back when we moved in, that's how tall the tree was. And this is how much it's grown in 2.5 years. Something was going on. And the something that was going on is that's our septic tank. The builder knew a whole lot about building wonderful houses. The builder did not know anything about river birches because river birches do not require clear, gurgling mountain streams. They will take whatever water they can get. And guess where it was getting it from? So on a cold February morning, 0 degrees, I go out with my trusty chainsaw and I fell the 5 pieces of that clump birch down across the driveway, go out, I cut it up into fireplace lengths, and we burned that puppy for 2 years. Absolutely wonderful. I felt really good about that. But what we had left, though, was a stump. So I call in a stump grinding service. Stump grinder comes over, takes a look at it, says, yep, I can get that out. Quotes me a price. Say, okay, fine, that's worthwhile. I'm willing to pay that. Betty says, how do you pull it out? He says, well, I got this machine. I set it right over the top of the stump, and it just grinds it out. He says, well, what about the other plants in here? He says, so what? This is that inner sidewalk bed with all the plants in it. She says, no, we are not going to do that. Oh, okay, fine. Well, I've got a great solution. Let's go ahead, let's put in a sundial. Put a sundial right on top of the stump, declare victory, move on, get on with our lives, everything's going to be fine. Betty says, no, we are going to dig out that stump, which is spouse speak for you are going to dig out that stump. And so for 6 weeks, I went out every time the weather was good, and I dug that stump out. I dug down 4 feet into the ground. I followed that taproot all the way to the edge of the septic tank. But I got every single root out of there, and I saved every plant in that garden. And everything was absolutely wonderful. And when you finally get to what it is you're looking for, that's priceless. So that's what it looks like now. Let me finish up with what I call the garden bench conundrum. Anybody else here have benches in their garden? Yeah, I see a lot of heads shaking, yes. Well, we have beautiful benches. We have glorious benches. We've got the most beautiful benches you have ever seen. We've got benches that overlook gardens, benches that overlook the lawn over the house. We have one in the back that does nothing but overlook a pond behind our home. But there's this problem. And the problem is simply that I never sat in any of those benches the last year, or the year before that, or the year before that. In fact, I have never sat in those benches because I never had time. I retired 8 years ago. I'm supposed to have time. I still never got time to sit in any of those benches. So I figured, okay, it's me. The only problem is simply it's me. All right, we got a good friend, lives down in Cape Cod. His name is Paul Miskovsky. He is the Gunzelmacher landscaper to the stars. If you have $1 million to spend on a garden, he is your go-to guy. He is such a great landscaper that he built a waterfall in his backyard. And he placed little seating areas along the sides of the waterfall where you can see an entire family around tables and stuff. There's little shelters and everything. So we're going down to see him one Saturday in August, and Paul does not work on Saturdays, and so we say, Paul, how do you decide where you're going to be sitting in the evening? How do you choose which place? Paul looks at me like I have lobsters coming out of my ears. He says, Neal, 5 days a week, I'm driving a Bobcat starting at 6 o'clock in the morning. 12, 13, 14 hours later, I come home. Do you think I want to think about going up there and finding some place to sit? What I want is a tall, cold, alcoholic beverage in front of me, and I want a baseball game on, and that's what I want. Forget about what's up there. I'm not alone. It isn't just me. So what are the benches for? Please don't tell me they're visual destination points. Oh, I don't think I could live with that. Are they for that tantalizing someday? Because if so, it hasn't happened yet. Are they there so that other people can enjoy them? I thought it was going to be a rhetorical question, with these cosmic questions that you never get an answer to, but I did get an answer, and I got the answer 2 years ago. Part of the curriculum vitae that Mike spared you is that for 3 years as a volunteer, I ran what is called Blooms at the Boston Flower and Garden Show, meaning I was in charge of all of the amateur horticulture, all the things the Massachusetts Horticultural Society does at the flower show. And part of that is that the society puts up this huge, beautiful landscape exhibit. And this, in fact, was designed by Betty. This was a 2012 show. This was a 2-story townhouse. It's got a 22-foot deep garden in front of it. This garden is 51 feet long. This is how big it is, and it has got thousands of plants in it. But unlike the other exhibits where you just sort of sit there and you look over a railing and look inside of it, we wanted people to actually come into the garden and sit down and enjoy themselves. Sit down. So what we did was we created an area down here at the far end of the garden where it had a little secret garden surrounded by tulips and daffodils. And what we decided we needed to have in that, we need a garden bench. Where are we going to get a bench? It's sitting right there under our deck. We put it away in October, having never been sat in, put it in a truck, drive it into Boston, plant it in the Seaport World Trade Center right there, and that's what we did with that. And so is there for other people to enjoy them? 75,000 people came to the show, and fully a third of them went in here to the secret garden in order to get their picture taken. So, are the benches there so that other people can enjoy them? Yeah, sometimes that's exactly what the fact is. Well, we're at a library, so I'm going to tell you a little bit more about why gardening is a mystery. And what I'd like to tell you about is instead of describing every one of my books in excruciating detail, I'm going to tell you about one of them and how it came to be. And I call this The Anatomy of an Unplanned Sequel. When my epitaph is written, my fear that it's what it's going to say is that Neal Sanders, oh, he wrote The Garden Club Gang and some other stuff. The Garden Club Gang has been far and away my most popular book. It tells a tale of 4 ladies of a certain age who find that they are invisible in society and decide that they are going to use that invisibility to their advantage. They knock over the Topsfield Fair. But in the process, they have very good reasons for doing so. And while somebody was saying that they're reading the book right now, the question isn't who done it, because you know that on page 1, but are they going to get away with it? Because everything doesn't quite go the way it's planned. And so what they find is that they've gotten far more money than they think they're supposed to have, so a lot of very bad people are after them. And it's a really great book. But I wrote the book, and I don't think the book had been out even 2 weeks when I got an email to say, gosh, that's a really great book, what are they going to do next? So I typed a response to the person. I'm saying, look, this is a standalone book. This is not intended to be part of a series or anything like that. I mean, I have these characters. I can't have them go off, rob another fair. That isn't the way the world works. So, gee, I hope you understand that, there's only ever going to be one of these. But by the time I look around, it's gotten to be like this. So I succumb to whatever it is that every writer does, and that is, I'm going to come up with a sequel. So I started thinking about a sequel. I said, okay, what I'm going to do is I'm going to put the ladies on an airplane, I'm going to send them to England, and they're going to get into mischief over there, and they're going to rob the Bank of England or something like that. Or no, let's work that out. I know, okay, one of them is going to fall ill, and she's going to need a heart transplant, but she can't afford to pay for it, so the ladies have to rob another something or other in order to go ahead and pay for it. Here's a secret, and that is that when you are an author and things are going really well for you, your characters begin to talk to you as you're writing. It's marvelous. I mean, they will tell you, they will give you plot points. They will start writing their own dialogue. They will tell you, oh, this, you want to go this way like this. Well, my characters were talking to me, but they were saying things that I didn't want them to say. And mostly were saying, this is a really stupid book you're writing. So I went ahead and for the next 2 years, I just told everyone, oh yes, the sequel to The Return of the Garden Club Gang is going quite well. Yes, everything, you'll be out soon. Hadn't written a word of it. Then last fall, I go back and I'm rereading The Garden Club Gang, and I get to the last page of the book, and it's as though I'd never seen that page before, because it turns out I had the setup there all the time. That there's this car dealership up there in the North Shore, and there's some crook up there. And the lady who had helped them is an insurance investigator, and she says, boy, if I could just get somebody into that dealership undercover so that I could get evidence of the fraud. Saying, whoa, they're not going to commit a robbery. This is their opportunity to atone for what they've done. So they're going to do some good deeds. All right. So as it turns out, I was shopping for a car at that particular point in time. And I do not like shopping for cars. I do not like the tactics that dealerships do. I don't like anything about the process. It is no fun at all. But I went into enough dealerships, to where I came away with an understanding, and I created the Pokrovsky Motor Group. The Pokrovsky Motor Group is, I want you to meet these guys. Here's Smiling Oliver. He's the patriarch of the outfit. And this guy is a piece of work. He's got these carefully cultivated, he's a philanthropist. Now he's retired and living down on the Cape and all this. This guy is one mean dude. And this is his idiot son, Al Jr. Al Jr. is the person who's actually doing all these horrible things that the insurance investigator wants to have investigated. So I said, I think I got a pretty good leg for the story here. But that's a kind of a shallow story. And so I needed to tell another story to go along with it. And life, when you're writing, is full of what you call sort of aha moments. And there are certain epiphanies that take place. And one of them came in last year, and nodding in here. And it was the death of a absolutely wonderful woman who had been sort of a linchpin of the Medfield Garden Club for many years. She died. She was living in a nursing home at the time. We went to her memorial service, which was held at the nursing home. And it was a wonderful, it was a moving event. And I thought a lot about Mary and what I had never really known her family. And she turns out she has, she was in her 90s. And she has adult children, children my age. And grandchildren who are in their 30s, little children running over that, multiple generations. And I'm thinking, could I do something with that? And I'm not sure exactly what it is I'm going to do. But as we're driving home, listening to the radio, and you've probably heard these ads before, it's these things, there's nursing homes, the nursing home wants your money. I'm saying, not interesting. Now, usually I change the station. I hate those so much, I will switch the button, I'll turn off the radio, do whatever it is, but now I listen to it, and I listen to these people, going on about, we have asset protection programs which will save all your money. That's fascinating. So I start thinking, what would happen if? What would happen if a 93-year-old woman living in a nursing home dies of a heart attack, and at the memorial service one of the members of the Garden Club gang overhears two men who are talking in detail about her finances. And she doesn't know who they are, she's never seen them before, why are they here in the first place? And also, another person who was there is this woman's granddaughter, very caring, mid-30s, and she is convinced that she was healthy. In fact, she wanted to move out of the nursing home. And so she goes to this member of the Garden Club gang who, just because she knows that she knew the woman so well, and said, could you help me? And so in short course, what's going to happen is that the ladies are going to take down the crooked Pokrovsky Empire. In fact, they're going to do that on page 1. I'll tell you that right now. But what they're also going to do is they're going to go undercover at that nursing home in order to determine what really happened to their friend. Did she die of natural causes? Because at 93, you're off the actuarial tables. Or did somebody help this along? And finally, they're going to investigate these asset protection schemes and find out, were they somehow involved with all of this? Well, that's a pretty good deed to do, but if you're familiar with Clare Boothe Luce, you know one of her most famous sayings is, no good deed goes unpunished. And so, as they're doing all this, they're going to find themselves smiling owls out there, and he's after them because they ruined his reputation. It was actually his idiot son who ruined the reputation, but they were the instruments of bringing him down. So he's going to be after them. And also they're going to find out that they poked a couple hornets' nests inside this nursing home, and they're going to be finding out some things that they didn't want to learn there after all. That is called Deadly Deeds. And Deadly Deeds came out last year, and it is a book that has, I hope now that they're going to say, yeah, he wrote The Garden Club Gang and Deadly Deeds too. My other books, very quickly, somebody said they had read Murder Imperfect. It is my firstborn. It's a wonderful, heartwarming tale about a housewife in Wellesley Hills, you got to say that properly, who in the opening paragraph of the book says, you can call this a confession if you must, but last year I murdered my husband. I did it in cold blood with malice aforethought. Then in the second paragraph she says, nah, let's not call this a confession, because that implies guilt or remorse. I don't feel the least bit guilty. I certainly have no remorse. The bastard got what was coming to him. She's going to take an interesting ride through the criminal justice system. My favorite book, and sentimental favorite anyway, is The Accidental Spy. I grew up in a Pan-American family during the golden age of air travel. I grew up 3 blocks from Pan Am Stewardess Academy, and my tongue would hang out and touch the sidewalk. They were goddesses. And I also worked in the semiconductor industry for a number of years, and so I took all those elements, tied them together, and did a work of what you call romantic suspense. Anybody ever see the movie North by Northwest? Okay, if anybody can tell me the plot of North by Northwest, you get a prize. Because the plot is really, what you really remember is got Cary Grant and Eve Marie Saint, and Cary Grant's trying to get machine gun in a cornfield, and he and Eve Marie Saint are running across the face of Mount Rushmore. What's the plot? Who cares? It's the two of them falling in love on a cross-country chase. Well, this is Joe Delaney and Susan Klein on a cross-country chase falling in love, and it's got a great plot, but nobody ever remembers the plot. They just remember the fact that it's 2 great characters. A Murder in the Garden Club is the book that I wrote back when people would actually speak to my wife when she went to when she went to the Medfield Garden Club meetings. Now, as these two ladies in the front will attest, Betty walks into the room and they gather on the other side of the room and they will not talk to her, because this book is made up of all the stories that she would come home, she would say, "You wouldn't believe what I heard today." I said, "Yes, I would. Tell me all about it." And I wrote them all down. They turned into a great murder mystery. And in fact, Eve Potts, who is sitting here in the row, agreed to be the person who was murdered off in the book. And the police initially think that Eve's death is it's an accident. She tripped over a dog, fell down the stairs. But the president of the garden club knows differently, because she spots all the things that are wrong with this, and she has to drag the police kicking and screaming to understand, in fact, this was a homicide. That book also actually has sold quite well, and it spawned a sequel called Murder for a Worthy Cause, which takes place at the building of, you ever see Extreme Makeover Home Edition? Well, one of these shows comes to this little town in suburban Boston, where they're going to build a needy home for a family in a week, and a town selectman is found dead at the scene the very first day of construction. And you only got 5 days to solve the crime, because then they move on to something else. A great story, a tremendous plot to it. Deal Killer, I worked for many years in investment banking, and this is my pay-in to that. It's about a story about a young investment banker who thinks she's on a routine assignment where a small company is being acquired by its larger competitor. And when her cars run off the road, she's convinced that somebody's trying to kill her, and she's absolutely right, because somebody inside the company is trying to make this their golden parachute payday by stealing money during that process. And 2 weeks ago, last week I guess it is, it seems like such a long time ago, Murder for a Worthy Cause came out. Again, I spent those 3 years running the flower show. I learned a lot, and I put it into a terrific mystery that talks all about how it is that flower shows run, and how the executive director of the New England Botanical Society is found floating face down in one of the water features of the show the night after the opening gala. Thank you so much for coming. Thank you so much for being here. The books that I've written are in fact for sale back there. All of them are priced at $14, and 10% of the proceeds go back to the Friends of the Library so that they can keep putting on programs like this. You have been a wonderful audience. Thank you. I don't know if anyone has any questions. I don't know if I could answer them. If it's a question about horticulture, talk to her. But if it's all about what it's like to be married to a famous horticulturalist, you can ask me. Great. Then thank you for coming.
How did you get rid of the slugs?
Iron phosphate. Iron phosphate works beautifully on them. Yes, and it's inexpensive.